So the introduction PowerPoint listed digestive organs, but I want to go through them one at a time so that we can actually see what's happening within these organs and how they contribute to both mechanical and chemical digestion. So the first place that food enters is obviously the mouth or the oral cavity. Mechanical and chemical digestion both begin here. So the food is going to begin to be broken down from the larger parts that you have in one bite into smaller parts that you can swallow, as well as chemical digestion. Chemical digestion is going to begin mostly of carbohydrates with amylase that's found in the saliva. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the salivary glands, and even more next week when we talk about macromolecules. So the oral cavity contains your teeth, your tongue, and your salivary glands. These are all organs of digestion. It also contains buffers that are going to neutralize any of the acids that you eat so that they don't hurt your teeth too much. And it has antibacterial chemicals. So these are going to kill some of the bacteria that may enter in your food. So 5-second rule, fact or fiction. I guess you can be the determinant of that. But yes, there are antibacterial chemicals that will help kill some of the bacteria that may come in. Still appropriate to cook food well so that you don't have more bacteria coming in. Parts of the oral cavity. So you have your hard palate and your soft palate. Your hard palate is the front of the roof of your mouth. It's made of bone for your maxilla bone. And then the soft palate is the back. It's muscular and it sits behind, so it's a little bit softer. You can feel that with your tongue, the difference between the hard palate and the soft palate. The uvula is the dangly ball thing, and then your tonsils sit on the side. Your tonsils help fight off infection. As you know, tonsillitis is when they get inflamed, and sometimes people have to have them removed. Also in your oral cavity, you have 32 teeth as an adult. This does include wisdom teeth, so most people have wisdom teeth removed or they don't grow in. So most people actually only have 28 teeth as an adult, but you do have 32 that are technically growing there. Their job is mechanical digestion, so they're going to bite your food and then they're going to break it down into smaller parts before it is swallowed. Your tongue is really important. Obviously, we use our tongue for speaking, but it's also really, really important with digestion. It is mostly made of skeletal muscle. As you know, you can control your tongue. It moves food both towards the pharynx, so towards the back of your mouth so that it can be swallowed, which we'll talk about more when we talk about the swallowing process. And your tongue moves your food under your teeth so that it can be chewed. Your tongue additionally mixes food with saliva so that the saliva can really coat it. We're going to talk about the saliva in a second. And it, as you know, contains taste buds. The salivary glands secrete two types of saliva, a thick mucus and a watery serous saliva. As we know from different parts of the body that we've already talked about, mucus is thick and it acts as a lubricant, so it makes sure that the food itself is going to slide down easily. You also have the watery serous saliva, and that is going to contain amylase, which is an enzyme that's going to break down carbohydrates. We'll talk more about enzymes when we talk about the macromolecules, but it's important to know that there are two kinds of saliva, and therefore there are two functions of saliva: to lubricate the food and to begin to chemically digest the carbohydrates. Part of the acting as a lubricant and breaking down food is if you think about really delicious, awesome food, your mouth may start to salivate. If you think about really gross foods or you try to eat food that you don't like, saliva production will actually stop so that you can't or won't swallow that food. Your pharynx and your esophagus don't digest food. They're simply tubes or passageways to your stomach. So it goes from the mouth into the pharynx, into the esophagus. You have involuntary muscular walls, smooth muscle, that are going to aid in the swallowing. We'll talk about that process next week, but just know that there are tubes and digestion does not actually occur here. Then we get into the stomach. Contrary to what we may think, the stomach is not located in the middle of your abdomen. It's actually located on the left side of the body underneath your ribs, like just below your ribs. It is a hollow pouch, and the inside of it is a thick mucous membrane that has what are called gastric pits. And so you can see in this picture that these gastric pits are these deep glands, they're deep holes. And within there, you have 3 different types of glands that are going to secrete 3 different things, or multiple things, but 3 categories. You have mucus that's going to further coat the food. You have chief cells, which are going to secrete digestive enzymes. We'll talk more about those in a second. And you have parietal cells that secrete hydrochloric acid that's going to help break down the food. So your stomach is a very acidic environment. The stomach, as we mentioned, receives food from the esophagus. It's going to churn it and mix it around so that it mixes with the gastric juices. It's going to begin the digestion, the chemical digestion of protein through an enzyme called pepsin. And a little bit of absorption is going to begin to occur within the stomach before the food moves to the small intestine. There are a couple of problems that we have with the stomach, which you may know: gastric ulcers and acid reflux. So gastric ulcers are when there is a rip in the lining of the stomach. So that would be like over here. And then acid reflux, or gastroesophageal reflux, GERD, it occurs when you have these little sphincters. So the acid needs to stay in the stomach. And you have a little like valve kind of thing called the sphincter that closes so that the stomach acid can't go back up into your esophagus. If that doesn't close all the way, or it's irritated, then you can see here that some of the acid will actually go back up into the esophagus and will cause that burning. So you also have a sphincter at the distal end of your stomach called the pyloric sphincter. So what happens is within your stomach, the food is going to become a partially digested soup in the stomach called chyme, CHYME. And then it's going to pass through the pyloric sphincter into the small intestine. In the small intestine, as the food is passing into the small intestine, different enzymes are going to be added to break down the food further. Here, before we talk about the small intestine, I want to talk about 3 of the important accessory organs found within your digestive system. You have your liver, your pancreas, and your gallbladder. Your liver and your gallbladder work together. The pancreas works separately, but together, all 3 of them, you can see there's a tube here, and a tube here, and they all join to form one common duct that's going to secrete all of these enzymes into the start of the small intestine. It's important to note, and the note will pop up on every slide, that the food does not pass through the liver, does not pass through the gallbladder, and does not pass through the pancreas. Instead, these are accessory organs, and the food stays within the stomach to the small intestine. It does not pass through these organs. So the pancreas is going to first neutralize the acid from the stomach. These buffers are really important because we needed the acid in the stomach to really start breaking down that food and to kill any bacteria that we can. However, that acid would hurt the rest of our intestines. So we need to neutralize that acid. It also produces digestive enzymes and secretes them into the small intestine. It produces a number of digestive enzymes for proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids, all 3 types of macromolecules that we eat. The liver, as we probably know, has lots of different functions for other body systems. So it helps make things, it stores vitamins, it helps detoxify. We know that the liver plays an important role in protecting your body from drugs and alcohol and detoxifying those if they're consumed. And that's where a lot of liver disease comes into play, is excessive alcohol or drug use. However, these are not digestive functions. The digestive function is that together with the gallbladder, they're going to break up lipids within the small intestine. So the liver produces bile, the gallbladder stores extra bile, and then the bile is an enzyme that is secreted into the small intestine to break up lipids. Also interesting, it's green, kind of greenish yellow. So then the small intestine, this is where the magic happens. This is for digestion and absorption. This is pretty much where everything is going to happen in terms of actually getting the nutrients into your body. You can see that your small intestine is wrapped around like this. It's super, super long. And you have your mesentery here. The mesentery is going to hold everything together. It also has blood vessels coming in through it. And part of the lymphatic system so that it has the supply of blood that it needs. The digestion within the small intestine, mechanical digestion, is occurring a tiny bit as it's being passed around, but for the most part, we're just talking about chemical digestion here. The small intestine is going to produce its own mucus, its own watery fluid, its own digestive enzymes, and it's also going to use the digestive enzymes that were secreted by the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. Once the food is broken down into its smallest nutrients, it can then be absorbed. They're absorbed both through diffusion and through active transport, so some using energy and some not using energy. And you have what are called villi or microvilli. You've perhaps learned about them in biology or heard about them in the past. And what happens is instead of just being a smooth tube on the inside, instead you have these big ridges, and then you have little itty bitty ridges that come off of that, and even smaller ridges that come off of that. And what this does is it increases the surface area for absorption. So you have a lot of surface area for absorption and a lot more than if it were just a smooth tube. So within your small intestine, the food is really, really watery, and it's all the nutrients are being absorbed. By the time you get to the large intestine, you don't really have much digestion going on here. Your food has basically been digested, the nutrients have pretty much been absorbed, and so now we're going to get rid of the water because remember it was really, really soupy, but we want the water to come out now. Your large intestine is named the large intestine because it's thicker around, it's a wider tube. It is much shorter than your small intestine. So here your body, your large intestine reabsorbs about 90% of the water that comes in. It also absorbs electrolytes to maintain that balance. As it does so, it forms and stores feces. There's additionally mucus within the large intestine that's going to protect it. Because now remember, we took away most of the water, so it would be a little rougher and more friction as it slides through your large intestine. You have different parts of your intestine. You can see your appendix is down here, kind of hangs off as an itty bitty tiny pouch. You have your colon, your ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, and this is your sigmoid colon. Here's that mesentery again that I mentioned before, that thin membrane film. If you don't reabsorb enough of the water, that's when diarrhea occurs. If you absorb too much of the water, that's when constipation usually occurs. And this usually happens from the food moving through the intestine too quickly. So with diarrhea, what happens is the food moves through your intestines too quickly to reabsorb the water that it needs to. I mentioned this mostly because diarrhea is a leading cause of death in poorer nations. And what happens is that we can take Imodium to slow that down. That's how Imodium works. It actually slows down your intestines so that it has time to reabsorb the water. But unfortunately, a lot of people, especially children, can end up dying from diarrhea. Their body's trying to get rid of the whatever might be in the food that wasn't healthy, the bacteria, for example, and so it moves too quickly through, but it leads to dehydration. The rectum then stores the waste until it's ready to be expelled, and then it's expelled by the anus, which is the actual opening. One thing that I think is super interesting about the large intestine is that you have intestinal flora or bacteria that are going to break down molecules. And so one of those is E. coli. E. coli is bad when you eat it on your food because it's not meant to be in other parts of your digestive system. However, E. coli is good in the large intestine. It's going to digest cellulose from fruits and vegetables. It also produces vitamins, K and B, and it generates a methane gas. So if we look at the overall pathway of digestion, food comes into the mouth where it's broken down mechanically and chemically, passed on to the pharynx, the esophagus, and into the stomach where it's mixed with some digestive enzymes, and acid and mucus, and it start to make into like a soupy paste. It then goes into your small intestine. The opening is actually behind here. The connection between the stomach and the small intestine is behind the large intestine. Here you have your liver, your gallbladder, and your pancreas are going to secrete enzymes into the small intestine. The small intestine also produces enzymes itself and watery fluid and mucus that are going to then go through that whole small intestine here, this light pink, before over here it's then passed on to the large intestine, up, over, and down, where the water is reabsorbed, electrolytes are reabsorbed, and it's made into a solid waste, which is stored in the rectum and then expelled through the anus. The last thing I wanted to talk about is digestion in different species. And so when you look at a carnivore versus an herbivore, you can see that the carnivore has a shorter digestive system overall, and that the cecum specifically, this like orangish reddish part here, is a lot shorter in the carnivore as compared to the herbivore. The herbivores have longer digestive systems, and because of that cecum, it's able to digest the cellulose in the cell walls. It also has more bacteria that's going to aid in that digestion. So as much as I applaud vegetarian diets and people feel better on it, or for ethical reasons, of course, they do vegetarian diets, our digestive system as a human is a lot more similar to a carnivore than it is to an herbivore. We have a very small cecum. We don't have this really, really long cecum, and we also are not able to digest cellulose within the cell walls of plants. And so for us, we should still eat lots and lots of vegetables, and if we don't eat meat, that's fine. But we are not able to digest that cellulose, and so this is known as insoluble fiber on our nutrition labels because it just adds bulk to our waste, and it helps our digestive system, but we're not able to actually digest it. Obviously, we still get tons and tons of nutrients from vegetables, and so we're able to extract those nutrients, but the cellulose itself we're not able to break down.